what we're going to cover. Over this webinar, we will cover overview of permissions in Inside.SMU. We will also go through the securables, inheritance, and how permissions are inherited from a top-level site and down. We'll go over a demo, and then we'll save some time at the end for questions. So really the first thing to talk about is a couple of important definitions. There's authentication and authorization. Authentication allows you to understand who someone is, to make sure they are who they claim to be. So an example would be making sure that I'm Kurt Harridge, and I know that by having my user ID and my password. So that's authentication. Authorization is the rules and permissions that determine what you can do. So in terms of Inside.SMU, authorization is really what you can see and what you can view, edit, and change. I'd like to take a minute to go over how we designed the Inside.SMU site structure. What we tried to do was consider where people would ultimately need to store things. We have organization sites, and those really are, athletics, the different organizations around campus, business and finance, legal affairs, office of the provost, etc. Organization sites generally are meant to be shared amongst all of campus. So if you have, for instance, some type of item that you want anyone on campus to see, it would ultimately belong on the organization site. At least that's according to our theory. The same would be true for school sites. So there's a site for every school on campus. Committee sites are meant to be formed on either an ad hoc or for a long-term committee basis. Student sites are meant for groups of students or small class groups to get together and have a space. And then the one you're probably most familiar with is team sites. Team sites are where individual teams share things really internally or between one small team and another. Let's see. So let's boil it down just to make sure we understand who can get where right off the bat. Students, faculty, and staff can authenticate to the base site of Inside.SMU. That means that anyone with an SMU ID and password can get to inside.smu.edu. They can do that either on campus or off campus, through VPN or not. So we generally call that available to the world, but you must have an SMU ID and password to get to it. Students, faculty, and staff are authorized to view organization sites and school sites. So right off the bat, a student could go and see the Cox School of Business site or perhaps the Business and Finance site. Now, committee sites are customized at creation. So when someone requests a committee site, they also request who has access to it and then can expand on that access or contract as needed. The same is true for team sites. Team sites are customized at creation based on the request. And student sites are also in that same boat. They're customized at creation. So what items can have permissions? Well, the first thing, of course, is a site. You can certainly secure a site itself. You can secure a document library, change permissions on it. And you can do the same for individual documents. So if you have one single document, you can reduce permissions to that or even expand permissions. In the list world, many of you have probably worked with lists. You can secure calendars, announcement lists, or even your own custom lists. And something not a lot of people know about, but can be an important feature is you can have custom permissions on individual list items. That's valuable a lot of times in workflow, and that's something that we use in OIT when we help develop workflows. Let me give you an example. If you are submitting a form, perhaps conflict of interest, once you submit that form, we want to change the permissions where no one else can see it. We don't want anyone to see what you've submitted. So the workflow actually has an action item to change the permissions on that particular list item so that only the administrator of the survey can see it. Let's talk briefly about permissions levels. This is a really busy slide, so we're not going to go over all of it. I will at the end send out, or we'll have Laureen send out the slide deck for you. But I'd like to talk about kind of the basic permissions levels here. So limited access. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but it allows access to the shared resources in the website so that you can just get in the door. Limited access really means nothing unless you have permissions to something else, and we're going to go over that a little bit more in a few minutes. Read is really just what it means. You can view the pages, list items, and download documents. So you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen what's included by default in each of these permission levels. Contribute means that you can change things in existing lists and document libraries. And design means you can actually change the website as well. So let me go to the next page where I have a little bit more description on all of this. So you'll see contribute has the read permissions plus a whole lot of other things such as adding, editing, deleting, a little bit of version management as well. When you get to design, you'll see that you can do all of that. You can create lists and manage lists, and then you can also create your own customized pages. And then full control allows everything. It means you can create subsites. It means you can approve anything. You're a contributor, a designer, and of course a reader. So at SMU, we typically don't give people full control permissions, and the reason being we try to limit the creation of subsites. We really want to know when sites are created so that we can help manage that. So let's talk a little bit about the permissions hierarchy. Now, by now you may be getting a little tired of the slide deck. We will go to demos very quickly here so that we can see some pretty specific examples. But understanding how the permissions actually feed down is important. You can grant a domain user or a domain group specific permissions. So you'll see there that I have a dummy SMU ID, and then I just picked a group at random from our Active Directory. So you can grant permissions to either of those. You could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 has design permissions. And then you can actually, if you really want to get granular, you can add additional permissions to that. You can do the same for a group. So a group can be given full control, for example. Or you can add people to SharePoint groups. Typically, you'll see owners, visitors, and members, and it will be preceded by the site name. So if the site name is training, it would be training owners, training visitors, and training members. You'll know that owners group they'll have design permissions. Visitors will have read, and then members generally have some type of contribute permissions. So I want to talk about limited access, why you would see limited access. On the picture before you, which I have pretty much stolen from the internet, you will see a team site and then a document library. The team site gives John Doe no access, and then the document library underneath that is inheriting the team site's permissions. So that would mean that John Doe does not have permissions right now to the document library. What you can instead do is what's called breaking inheritance. Another word for it is just stopping inheritance. And then you can add John read access to the document library. Well, you'll see the end result on the team side is that John Doe now has limited access. And understanding that's pretty important because you may, if you went to your team site and saw that Kurt Herridge has limited access to your team site, you might wonder why. Well, it can end up showing you, and you can see that I have read-only access to the document library. It's really limited access is just to get you in the door to the site so you can even just see the basics of the site. And then you have the specific permission that allows you to get to either the document or the document library. Hope that makes sense. We'll show an example here of it pretty soon. A couple of important icons for this that you'll see in the ribbon. Permissions, you'll see the Stop Inheriting Permissions button. That means I want to start managing at this level. A lot of times you'll do that at a document library. You could do it on an individual document. But that's your first step to changing something specific. You have to stop inheriting permissions. When you are inheriting permissions, you'll see an option to manage parent. You can also choose to inherit permissions. That's another option if you have stopped it previously. So let's get to some nitty-gritty here, and let's show some permissions. I've created this pretty nifty, I think, permissions demo site. So to manage permissions, always under Site Actions, Site Permissions, or you can, well, that's probably the best way. You can go to Site Settings, or you can find Site Permissions here. So if you do a scan down the list, you'll see some built-in groups. Approvers and designers are built-in groups. I have previously granted the domain group faculty members read access to this site. Hierarchy managers is also a built-in management group, and it's not related. You don't really need to worry about it. And then you'll see owners and members. You'll see that owners have full control. We've talked about that. And that members have contribute access. And you also see they have that limited access. So that's the in-the-door access. I've also given staff members read access. Then style resource readers, that's another group that kind of gets you in the door. Then finally, there's the system account down here, and that's just so SharePoint can run itself. Now, one useful tool here is you can always check permissions so you know who has what. So let's look at Kurt. So I'm given full control because I'm part of the Inside.SMU owners group. I also have read permissions because of the staff members group. So it tells you why you have this and how you got it. So let's say we want to check Lorene instead. So we'll see that Lorene here is being given through the staff members group. So she can certainly read any document or anything on this site. So if she were to go to Team Documents, she would be able to, for instance, view this agenda. Now, let's say we don't want Lorene looking at our agenda ahead of time, so we want to go ahead and make some changes. So you'll notice the nice yellow bar that says this document inherits permissions from its parent. So if we want to make changes, like I talked about in the presentation, we will stop inheriting permissions. So it's going to warn you, you're about to create unique permissions. Changes made to this will no longer, changes made above this will no longer affect this document. Okay? So now let's go ahead and just remove all staff members from this. And then let's do the same check we did a few minutes ago. So you should expect that I would still have full control. I made no change to the owners group that you'll see here behind this window. Let's check Lorene now. She has no permissions to this. So let's take it a step farther. Let's say that I didn't want staff, but I do want Laureen to have permissions. I just want her to have read permissions. Since we're on this subject, if you do happen to grant people permissions to something, you can send them a welcome email. Okay, so now Laureen has access to read. So we're going to click check permissions again. And we should expect to see her having read given directly. It explains why. Now I think we should take a moment and go up to the permissions demo site. Let's see, do we see Laureen? Oh yes, here we go. So she now has limited access. Again, limited access means she has the in-the-door access just to get to this uniquely secured content that you'll see here. So let's click that here. So it said lists that may contain unique permissions. Well, let's view the exceptions here. So now this will tell me something that I've made a choice on in the past that either I forgot or maybe I made a mistake on. One thing I do pretty frequently with Inside.SMU is I try to pick maybe a student that I know or something, and I test it to make sure that they don't have access. Unfortunately, I came here today without knowing a student's name. Harris? Okay. Thanks. Sorry about that, guys, as I take a break. Okay, so Christina Harris is part of staff too. So she must have a student account that's been converted to a worker account over the summer. So it is nice to be able to check these things, and I recommend you do it as frequently as you can. So now we've seen the end result of granting a permission to someone in a document library. I'd like to go over list items as well. Oops, excuse me. So I created this handy dandy contact list a little while ago. So we have Jane Executive, Kurt Harridge, Laureen, and Rachel Mulry. Perhaps we don't want anyone to be able to see Jane's contact item. So you'll see here that I can manage the permissions specifically for Jane. I could choose here to manage the parent. You'll notice that it inherits from the site permissions demo. If I were to click that, it would take me there. Or we can go back, choose stop inheriting permissions. And perhaps we don't want really anyone, no staff, no faculty, and definitely not Laureen there. Perhaps we'll go ahead and remove members as well. So now again, we can come back and check. No permissions. So now we know that if Laureen comes to contact list, she will not see Jane Executive. She will see Kurt, Laureen, and Rachel. So that's one way to manage permissions on a specific list item. You can also go to the ribbon and click List, and you can see the list permissions themselves. So again, it's going to warn you of the situation. Here it's going to say some items on this list may have unique permissions which are not controlled. So you can see that. Or it'll also tell you that it's inheriting from its parent. We can stop inheriting. Then let's say we make a change. I don't really care what change because I'm going to show you how we start back with inheriting permissions. So now we don't really like our choice. We think we've made a bad decision. We want to start over again, or maybe we just want to get back to inheriting all permissions. Any custom permissions are going to be lost at that point. So anything you've done is going to be gone. So let's go back to this, and we're going to say inherit permissions again. So now for the contact list, all of these names are visible again. Let's see. If you create a folder, which I don't do very often, so I'm looking for my create folder option. I think I might have to do this one in another time. Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a way to create a folder. It's been a long time since I've done it, but you can also secure a folder should you want. Although I'll take a moment. The reason I don't create folders is because I don't think they're the best way to manage data in Inside.SMU. What might be better instead would be to create additional columns and views that help you out. You can also, of course, secure wiki pages, site pages, and team documents, really in the same way. So, a good use case for creating a page with specific permissions would be if you had some data you didn't want exposed. Maybe you have an instructional page or an instructional wiki page that you don't want other groups to see. Again, my philosophy is you try and be as open as possible until you hit a spot where you have information that you don't want or need to share. And that's when you really start looking at permissions. I think this probably takes me to a point where I should answer some questions. I'm kind of past most of my instructional material, and I want to see what Laureen may have from questions at this point. Okay, I forgot, guys. I have one other poll to launch here while we're switching over. I'd like to know what your Inside.SMU experience is. Looks like we have a diverse audience. Well, guys, for those of you who have not used Inside.SMU, I encourage you to use it. And hopefully you can find it useful. We do have some other classes that we offer from time to time. I definitely encourage you to attend. But you may be here wondering how secure it is. So I definitely want to give you an opportunity to ask any questions. That there may be some security questions you don't know about, but really to summarize, it is only available to faculty, staff, and students who have an SMU ID and password. It is secured. It is first available on organization sites and school sites for faculty, staff, and students to view. And then committee, team, and student sites are secured on a case-by-case basis and usually left up to the site owner. So, oh dang, Elizabeth is saying her screen is small and she's having a tough time reading the demos. I think Laureen's trying to help me out here. And I can go back through a couple of these demos if that's the case.
Okay, I'm going to hop back on. In your top left screen, you'll see a Go to Training Viewer, and there's a Zoom button, and you can change that Zoom button to the percent that you want. So, for example, mine's like at 80%, but I could click, there's a button in the top left that says Zoom, and that will allow anybody to make their screen size bigger. And that's in the Go to Training window. So if we have any other questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'm going to hop off for a second and let Kurt take back over.
Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and go through one of the demos again, because really one demo is the same as all. So let me give you just a few seconds to adjust your screens. Okay, hang on. We're going to zoom in a little bit. Laureen's helping me out here. Yeah, why don't you make it 200%. Let's see if that works. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Laureen. Guys, I apologize. This is one of my first webinars. So let's go slowly through the permissions. So from site actions, if you're a site owner, you'll see site permissions. You'll see the yellow bar will always call attention to anything that you might need to know about how permissions are working. So in this case, it says some content may have unique permissions. Well, let's check that and see what it says. So it says that the team documents document library, you'll see that on the left-hand side in the gray area, has an exception. So we'll click View Exceptions, and we'll see that the document agenda.doc has specific permissions. And the specific permissions here, I know this only because I did it earlier, was we granted Laureen access. So we can check, we can always click the Check Permissions button at the top. She has read permissions, which are given directly. Now, if we choose to start inheriting permissions again, it's going to remove all custom permissions, and it will start again. So now it says the important information that you need to know, it inherits from permissions demo. So let's go manage permissions demo. Let's see if Emily Blackmore she has read permissions given through the staff group. So let's remove staff. I don't want Emily looking at my document anymore. So we'll remove all those permissions. And then we're going to check. So now we know that she won't be able to read any documents. She won't be able to get to the site. She won't be able to see anything on the site. In fact, she won't be able to search for documents that are on the site. Now, here on this site, we could choose to inherit permissions again. So let me show you just a couple other quick examples since I had the smaller screen before, and I want to make sure that it's as clear as possible. So we talked about a contact list. So from any list item, all the list items have a drop-down, and the drop-down will have the option to manage permissions. So there are cases, again, where you may want to change permissions on a specific list item. I would be careful about that. They're usually pretty specific, and you can find yourself having to manage permissions a lot for a list. Now, an example that may be more applicable would be, again, changing something for a specific document. So perhaps you have a salary survey or something like that that you really don't want anyone to have access to. So you can go to Manage Permissions, Stop Inheriting Permissions, and then you can just start removing groups that you don't want. We don't want the members. And I should note here, and it's important to note, that you could remove the owners. So you could if you needed to. So now we have created a very unique set of permissions. No permissions. Last thing to show you here. Let's go back to this document library, Team Documents. And you can always manage all permissions for something specific by going to its ribbon. You'll see Library Tools, Library. And now that I'm zoomed in a little bit, it's a little tougher for me to do it. But you'll see the key with the access here. It could also be a larger icon like Library Settings, but you'll see Permissions. And again, the yellow will show you some pretty specific information about what's going on. If we were to click Show Me Secured, it'll show the agenda that we've messed with. So you can change permissions at a site level. You can change them at specific library levels, whether it be a library or a list. And then you can change it for individual items, whether it be a specific document, a specific list item, or anything like that. And hopefully I've described all of this pretty well at this point. I'd like to open it up to questions and find out what you guys have. Hopefully hopefully I described it so well you don't have any questions, but I'd love to answer anything you have. What are the most common permissions that people use? I would say the most common things you'll see are read and contribute. Read is for people who you want to be able to view your things but not change them. And contribute is for when you want people to change things. We typically find most users, most people who use Inside.SMU tend to give their team sites contribute access because they're going to have people in and out a lot. What other questions do we have? Looks like we don't have any other questions. Well, if you do end up with questions, please feel free to email me directly or email IT training. I'm available at herridge, Herridge, at smu.edu. And I'm pleased to answer any questions you have. Another method is to send a help desk question to help@smu.edu. And here, actually, I'll put my email in here. If you need a site or have problems with a site, you can email help@smu.edu, and we will send out a slide deck for today's presentation. I certainly appreciate you attending and hope to see you at some other time. Take care.